And I've tried tonight to put on another little story, which is about our local grey-leg geese, or what we think of as local, and what that's been telling us in a sort of 6-month period. But that'll be part 2. So part 1 is really just describing all the different wonderful goose species you can see in D&G and that you are blessed with. And they're changing fortunes. Because a lot of the time I think people associate geese with just, there's too many of them and they're on the up and that's that sort of thing. They're doing brilliantly. But actually it's quite a bit more complicated than that. And so I'll try and relay that from a population perspective as well as in relation to individuals that give us that population perspective some of the time. And I say mostly to do with GPS tagging birds, which the technology has obviously developed a lot over the last 10 years and give us these amazing insights into birds that otherwise we'd have just had tiny little snapshots of from tiny little bits of their range, you know. Now we can track these things 24 hours a day, every second of the day almost it's coming to. So amazing insights, and it's told by the goose. There's no longer a scientist sitting out there in the field going, oh, I think it's doing this. I'm going to score that as it's feeding or it's walking or whatever. No, they're just telling us what they're doing all the time. So yes, first bit is really just introducing all of our species and the kind of broad studies. Then we'll take that wee break that Nick said about, and I'll try not to grab my stick at any point. I've been told not to use my stick. If you see me using the stick, tell me to put it down. So, yeah, the 4 main species, most of you might be aware of many of them already. And basically in the region, you've got the wintering migratory species of interest. So you've got the barnacle goose, you've got the green and white-fronted goose, you've got the pink-footed goose, and more recently, you're kind of getting this build-up of light-bellied Brent geese. They're mainly over to the west of the region, over near Stranraer. With us for quite a long time there, as you can see. I mean, people think of them just winter time, but barnacle geese, you're talking 8+ months. They're staying in D&G, so some are arriving mid-September, pardon me, and they're staying some years into June. I mean, all right, it's just getting out of D&G a bit there because they're on Rockcliffe Marsh in Cumbria, but that's a long while. You know, the river's a very long time. So really they're getting their whole breeding period, molting, raising their young, migrating up, migrating back in like 4 months, which is pretty impressive, really, to grow a full functional migratory machine that can do all that. Pink-footed geese, they're kind of quite different to those other 3 species I've got there because pink-footed geese are quite itinerant while they're here. They're moving around a lot. They're not just sticking to a hefted kind of home range that they know really well. So your barnacle geese, the Svalbard barnacle geese are obviously on the Solway. You know, the same birds, if you read a leg ring, it'll turn up at the same sort of sites year in, year out. Very limited range for a goose species. White front's the same, might only use 10, 20 fields at Loch Ken, say a population there. Light-bellied Brent's probably the same over Stranraer Railway. Pink-footed geese, they can be, you know, you can be looking at a field of 5,000 or flying over Dumfries town centre, for instance, some nights. They might be on their way to Fife. They spend a couple of days in Fife, come away back, and they're back on the Solway the next day. So they're really ranging around quite a lot. And they're quite happy to go to East Anglia as well. Coming up through the country, get as far as Wales. They don't really get into Wales, but yeah, anywhere else is pretty much fair game for a pink-footed goose. I've added another bit as well, just to highlight how you can lose goose species from your region. You know, they're not bomb-proof. Tiger bean geese, we used to get them on the Threave marshes, National Trust Scotland Threave marsh area. By the age 75, they used to go on the mound there, as it was called. Probably the bypass might have made it a bit less hospitable to them because they're quite nervy geese. They suffer from disturbance quite a lot. And the marshes there, some of those bits got drained, and of course they were still hunted at the time. I mean, hunting is quite a theme throughout this, of course, whether it's illegal or whether it's legal. Because some of our species are quarry species, some are protected. So pink-footed geese, and then finally grey-leg geese that I talk about are legal quarry species, whereas the others are all protected in theory. So yeah, the grey-leg goose, that's the last one. That'll become part 2. That's different because that's our only resident breeding native goose species. So of course, a lot of you know Canada geese, but they're introduced, so not the same. So grey-leg goose, we should be very happy to see them because they're actually quite a sort of bit of the megafauna, a big herbivore that actually is native and, was almost made extinct in Britain, was just hanging on in the sort of Outer Hebrides in the US till probably the 70s, 80s, and then started to kind of regain its former distribution. So it's come a long way since then. And in some areas now, of course, is seen as maybe a bit more of a pest species, unfortunately. So that's basically there. I'm picking out 4 of the species. I'm not picking out the Brent goose because it's such a small population at the moment. Say Iceland there, that's just the centre bit for where all, 3 of our pathways, basically, the light-bellied Brent geese, the green and white-fronted geese. So yeah, from Britain, obviously 2 of our main migratory species are going up via Iceland. Some are staying in Iceland, the pink-footed geese. They're staying in Iceland to breed. Some are carrying on in May to breed in Greenland, East Greenland, and some are doing that and going up to the furthest bit of rock land north that you can get to, so above about 85 degrees north. Some from Iceland are choosing to do that later in the season and go up there and molt as well, especially young birds. The green and white front moves on from Iceland across to the west coast of Greenland, so that travels across the ice cap, as do the Brent geese. But the Brent geese go the furthest. They're going sort of 4,000 kilometres in their journey to get to the Canadian Arctic, high Arctic islands. The white fronts stop on the west coast of Greenland in this sort of banana belt bit, which tends to stay snow-free and is a wee bit warmer. The 2 contrasting ones here are what used to occur in the region is the tiger bean goose, which now probably what was our population has actually shifted north and now overwinters in Slamanan near Falkirk, near Edinburgh. So there's a wee group of birds there, probably only about 220 odd at the minute. But used to occur down here, seems to have shifted range to there, maybe a precursor of climate change. They are really a temperate breeding goose. They're not a high Arctic breeding goose. They're only going up a certain amount into Sweden. They're not above the Arctic Circle. So they're travelling quite a short distance, just sort of 700-800k to Denmark, and then nipping over into Norway and Sweden. Barnacle goose, again, another one that's doing a sort of 3,000k journey overall to get up to Svalbard. It stops off in west coast Norway at Helgeland, Vesterålen, the Foten Islands to feed up to sort of second week of May, and then it will carry on and get up to Svalbard late May and start breeding. It might go via that wee outcrop that is Bjornoya Bear Island there. So yeah, that's their general routes. This little fella. This is how you obviously catch them, to mark them, is cannon netting. This is green and white fronted geese in Islay. So we're lucky enough there to be on a farm where they allowed us to bait them with sugar beet at the time, kaboom. So yeah, a 30 sort of metre long net, almost 4 cannons, black powder, and you're in a little remote hide and press the button when you see the birds settle safely under the sort of netting area. Yeah, and that was a catch of 9 birds, which was really nice. It's very slow work to build up a marked population for green and white fronts. They're in small groups. We've worked for many, many years to actually build up something that resembles a marked population. That works for all species, obviously. That's how we catch most of our species. You can catch geese as well during molt roundups when geese are flightless. They might have molted their primary and secondary feathers. So yeah, once you've got them in the hand, obviously this is barnacle geese now looking at, you can, take all the biometric measures, sex them, and usually what others such as Peter Scott, Hugh Boyd did back in the 60s, started it all, was you putting on little leg rings. So originally it was just colour rings, spiral rings, and then it got to actual letter codes on the rings, different colours. So yeah, you can generate thousands of possibilities, and you put the wee ring on, and you know that orange bird there is CUB, cub, that little guy down the bottom there, and it got a satellite tag on the back of it. At the time, that was about 10 years ago now, those ones were proper satellite tags. So they're talking to the Argos network, zipping about up there, and they're kind of quite boxy and a big aerial, which I never liked particularly. That was cutting edge at the time, and you might get sort of 4 or 5 fixes a day as to where that bird was. And unfortunately, you have to put that on the bird with a sort of elasticated harness. So you know it's quite a tricky procedure, and it's not sort of ideal, but it was the best at the time, and it gave you a lot of information about how these birds were faring, the different places they were using on the migratory routes. Some of those were going for, we had sort of some last, I think, 3 or 4 years typically, and then they were shedding the harness and the tags were dropping off, and you could pick them up again out on the Merce or wherever it ended up. And of course, Peter Scott used originally and used the information to set up reserves, and people, you know, have basically spent since the sort of 60s, 70s, you know, millions of hours of time and millions of pounds of money, really, in terms of setting up reserves and people's efforts to fund different conservation efforts and buy reserve land and all that. So we worked very hard to build that population up from 400 birds in the 40s, which is probably what it was at about its low point, to sort of 3 times that magnitude now, where we were at 40,000. So it's been a long, long process to do that. A lot of effort, you know, 60, 70, 80 years of a lot of effort. So that's what you get now, you know, this amazing spectacle, a big grand effect in front of Criffel there. That's at East Park. Quite dense flocks, obviously, like the grass that provided on the reserves at Merce Head and Calavrock. So well fertilized pastures. So a slightly artificial habitat. They're perfectly happy on salt marsh, which is pretty much as natural habitat as you'll get towards in the UK, really. And they will use that when they first arrive, the salt marsh, and again, when it gets the sort of spring flush, they prefer that to actually the intensive pastures. And they can put on fat on that quite quickly in March and April. And they kind of ecosystem engineers a bit, because they, you know, flocks of 5,000 when they're on salt marsh for a few days can, of course, crop the sward quite a lot and bring it down to a low level. So that used to set it up quite nicely in April for lapwing to breed. So you've got that sward. So yeah, there you go. That's what you can see with the scope kind of thing. If you get close enough, you can start to pick out pairs. So the male at the front, the female's behind there. Male's being a bit vigilant. That's probably a yearling bird that's hanging around at the back there. It's not a juvenile of the year, but it's probably a yearling bird, because they do sort of hang around for maybe a year or two, the young birds with the family. And then, of course, you can follow that bird. I mean, some of those we've followed for 30 odd years sometimes. So really long-lived bird. And each year you were trying to pick out kind of its breeding success. So there's the tags, the kind of evolution in the next sort of 5 years was to a tag with all the aerials internalized, and it's no longer talking to satellites. It's now basically a GPS tag that's talking to the phone network. Still a backpack, so not totally ideal. And what we could do with those is, because they had a much finer grain GPS rate, so you're getting down to sort of 15 minutes, 10 minutes maybe of a fix. Solar powered as well, rather than a finite battery. You start being able to ask questions about how the kind of increase in wind farms in the area was affecting the geese. This is just a flock flying in front of Robin Rigg out in the Solway there. But what we actually did was got some tags funded by a Beckburn wind farm in Cumbria there, which was kind of an ideal study site, we thought, as well as just wanted to know what kind of impact that might have, because it was a 9 turbine site that was going to be set up on an old peat bog, about 3 kilometres from the main gathering point of every single barnacle goose in the Svalbard Flyway, which is Rockcliffe Marsh in Cumbria. So early spring, every bird virtually in the Solway funnels in to Rockcliffe Marsh and tends to stay there for 2-3 weeks before then heading northeast, heading for Norway. So quite a dangerous kind of tight pinch point, I suppose you'd say, in the migratory route. And there was going to be 9 big turbines just up the way from it. So that, to me, was like, well, that's kind of a good opportunity to study what impacts these things might have, because you're going to have 30, 40,000 birds passing through there in one go. So if that doesn't have an effect on them, maybe wind turbines are fairly safe for them. So yeah, that's just a bit of a history there as to the background of how we used to tag them. So since 2006, we were doing this. That was when I was with Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. We used to do it, tag the males, because they had the aerials on the backpacks. We didn't want to affect mating, things like that. And then when the aerials were internalized, we started fitting it to the female birds. So you could actually get at things about breeding propensity as well then. how many times do they actually try and nest and lay eggs, which is kind of interesting when you're looking at population dynamics. And then more latterly, of course, they've had another bolt-on effect, which we didn't really predict, which was using them to monitor the spread of highly pathogenic avian influenza on the Solway. So as I'll come on to in a little bit, that hit barnacle geese quite hard, and the tags was another way to actually monitor that. So yeah, they've got multiple uses because they are just telling you what a goose is up to all the time. So pretty much anything you can think of as to what you want to know about a goose, this thing can probably answer it. And the tags got smaller and smaller. So there you've gone from backpacks of 45 grams, 65 grams, down now to 20-gram neck collar. So it's just a wee collar that goes around the neck. What's that? Yeah. Little 20 grams, about 1% body weight of a female goose. Okay, so they're 2 kilograms. So that's what you're always sort of looking for, really, is something that's about 1 to 2%. You don't really want to go above that. Very narrow, and again, solar powered and talking to the phone network. So it's all come on a huge amount. So this is what obviously you used to do, or someone used to do in relation to wind farm research, was let's sit at a vantage point somewhere on a little hill or a bridge down near the motorway there, the M74 by Gretna, and try and watch what barnacle geese do, and then they map the flight lines. So I didn't do this. This is a wee consultant grunt who just sat there for hours on end till it got dark, and then couldn't see what the geese did, of course, as soon as it gets dark. So you lose that massive bit of the story. But what was quite nice, I think, about that is this is all pre-construction, and I'm edging towards that, but I can't point at things. Can I point at it with a stick for now? So yeah, I think the main thing there to see is the northeast direction of those green and pink arrows, magenta arrows. That's spring 2009, spring 2010, and the way they're kind of going through the bottom right edge of that greyed out area, which is the wind farm and its buffer area. So 500 meters around the wind farm turbines. So that seems to be what they were doing year after year in spring, pretty much on those 2 years. I didn't touch that. Now, the tags I had on initially, those backpack ones, were in the years prior to the wind farm being built. The wind farm got interested in this as the wind farm was being built, and once it was built, unfortunately. So there's no pre-wind farm construction detailed data. There's only these dashed white lines, which represent the old style tags. Fixes can be hours apart, so you get this massive interpolation between fixes. But it did follow those observations in that most activity seemed to be concentrated in this sort of southeast bottom corner of the wind farm area. They were crossing through it. That matched those observations in 2009, 2010. So what you can put on top of that is the later years when we had these more detailed tags. They're those sort of coloured lines. You get many more fixes, some half an hour apart, 15 minutes apart. So you're getting a few more angles within it. And this one here, the purple line, down to the bottom right, has got lots of little trails on it, and that's where a tag is taking a fix every second. So you've got this brilliant detail all of a sudden, or what I thought was brilliant at the time. Wow, what's it doing? It's doing these little kinks and things. And generally, as you can see from that, there's this hint that they're now avoiding the wind farm that has been built. Moving on, this is a little animation of the seconds, and it's just the detail on that route that I just pointed out, the bottom one. There's the little tag. See, it's doing its little route up the line there. And another one will come in just that on a different day, because of the wind conditions, took a different route north out of Gretna, having messed about a bit on Rockcliffe Marsh down in the corner there. You'll see it heading out. And that's a fix sort of every few minutes there, that one, plus bursts of fixes every second. So, but either side of the wind farm, which is now constructed, and then you move on to the latest ones in 2019, which was, you've got these tags now. They're charging up beautifully in the sort of last days of April, early May, full massive amount of charge. And then you set your little geofence just away from Rockcliffe, so you don't blow all your charge in one go. Basically, you need the goose to know where it is in a geofence area and then start on its new regime of every second fix. So that's every second what a goose was doing when it's flying. So you see all these amazing new characteristics of the flight paths, where this one sort of does loads of little loops of figures of 8 as it's kind of assessing conditions, and then might move back to Rockcliffe Marsh, because it assesses the wind conditions weren't quite right. Some fly off to Kielder water with these tags, and they go, no, it's not quite right, and they come all the way back again. So seeing all this amazing detail that we never knew before. Was we had a point there and a point on the coast. But again, what this showed was almost every goose avoided the 9 turbines of Beck Burn, apart from one. One goose went over the top of it, and that's the green one in the middle, going over the dark bit, for those of you online. That you can plot out the height profiles, of course, from these tags. They're collecting height data. So what was interesting and sort of marginally annoying about that is that they actually seem to take their lead from the other infrastructure in the area, which is the pylon lines going along the M74 and the road and the railway bit. So there's a lot of stuff in that corridor, and actually they really take a hike up away from those pylons. So they see that, and that already puts them on a trajectory that takes them clear of the turbines. So yes, we may have this kind of north-south split around the turbine area, but also whether fortuitously or not, I don't know, they detect them or they detect the pylons, and they take this quite rapid emergency measure to go up quite high and get over them. So this is a sort of schematic representing the height of those functional turbines. You see there, that was the green one, by the way, that went through the middle of the wind farm. So it avoids them quite nicely. It's kind of double the height of the blades. And yes, they tend to migrate because they're making the choice in spring. They can see what's going on. They tend to migrate under a high pressure system, often a little bit of wind behind them, but very clear. They don't just head out into a storm or whatever. Whereas in autumn, of course, they can't predict the conditions so well. So sometimes they come back in less favourable conditions, or it might be misty, things like that. So the one to look at there, maybe the black line, that was a bird that took off from Calavrock direct. So actually that bird is well north of the turbine area and the wind farm and was just going across open country. So that one never took any kind of deflective emergency detour or anything like that, and would have, if it, you know, that just shows that where they'd be naturally, I suppose, the kind of height they fly at typically without any infrastructure in the way. So yes, again, repeat tracks, all of all, which showed basically, I think, culmination of all this is that the old tags, which had far less fixes, there's basically dotted fixes about on the coast and inland. Most of the trajectories are in this central sort of fan area, whereas the coloured tracks show you what the more recent tags have done since the wind farm has been fixed. So there almost seems to be a shadow effect of it. That's them up on the staging grounds, a nice little area they get to in the end, and breeding grounds, sort of habitats they nest in. There's one just to show that we are able to track what they're doing. Even the harness ones, the old ones, used to nest well. This will be their route back down in September time, which I might skip on. I'll skip on. So that's some of the threats. The more recent one that's cropped up has been the HPAI, the avian influenza. So what we clubbed together to do last winter was try and do fairly regular transects around the coast in little sections. So people from RSPB did sections. They did their fenced areas. I did a bit around Southern S. The Trust did some on East Park. Various people tipped in. Bart and I did a section on Rockcliffe Marsh. But basically, yeah, we found 4,500 dead birds overall out of the population, which was probably about 43,000. And that's just ones we were recording, of course, because this is a tidal situation. We know lots were going out of the channel and round past Mulberry and things like that from the tags they had on. So a lot of the tags were telling us how much were getting washed away to other areas where they may or may not get found. Some of them are ringed, so you know the history of them. You know the age structure of the birds that are dying. But yeah, the graph there shows, the little red cross just shows what we expected the population to be getting back. We couldn't actually get a count then because of bad weather. But anyway, that's what we expected from the year before, and juveniles, etc. And what we ended up with was this sort of 27,000 rather than 43,000 down in March because of all the avian influenza deaths. So there's a lot of ways we were monitoring that, and it was a massive hit for them. So 25% to 30% of the population lost, which is huge. No other species really was hit like that. And I just want to set that, I guess, against what maybe expectations were, this kind of background idea that we can manage goose populations, that we have a role to play in that. And what has been going on for the last sort of 5 years or so has been an attempt to kind of follow the American system of we're going to have adaptive management strategies for our wild goose populations, and we're going to set population levels that we want. So try and justify that, find ways of justifying that. So we only want, I don't know, 25,000, 30,000 barnacle geese, and that's it. Usually done through culling, of course. So the lifespan of that plan that all these experts put together in 2019 was going to be 10 years. So it was 2019 to 2028. It's a lot of funding. There's a lot of statos. There's a lot of university folk. There's meetings every year of people traveling out. I think they're in Helsinki for 3 days this year. So various Nature Scott people attend those to get the sort of their kind of I don't know, their kind of it's what they should do, the population that they maybe derive from that overall European level. As you can see there, they kind of can class barnacle geese in with all the other flyways. So you get these crazy big graphs of there's 1,200,000 of them. Everything looks rosy, doesn't it there? I mean, Brent geese going up, pink, everything's going up, bean geese, everything, there's loads of them. 1980s compared to 2010, everything's on the up, everything's brilliant. So they then plot graphs. So a friend of mine said my mum could do that, but yeah, they plot a graph. That's 2036, 2038. We're going to have bloody, 120,000 barnacle geese. That's nuts. That's worrying, isn't it? But actually, 4 years after they started that little plot, we were down there. We were down below what they said was going to happen with the population model. And actually, by 2021, we were off the graph already. We're below the y-axis they even gave it scope for, which I thought that's interesting. You see, it shows how we get carried away, I think, a bit and think we know these things, we know what's going to happen. We don't. So I think a bit of caution, hopefully, is what avian influenza is injected into people's ideas about management. And then I looked through the whole 100-page technical report as well. I looked for avian influenzas. I thought, well, that's such a big thing in Europe at the time because it was killing barnacle geese, that it must be in there. And I found it on page 46, and it was given a little thing under viral diseases and threats, number 8, future unknown, it got scored as. And then again in the appendix, just NA. So, I don't know, herbicides and pesticides got a bigger score at that point. I don't know how, and large dams and things. So yeah, just blindsided people designing population levels that our geese should hit. Pink feet, as to say, probably doing the best out of all of our geese in terms of population size. We've tagged them, tracked them. So these guys are going from Iceland all the way up to the northern edge of where geese can get to. And that's what they're finding up there. That's why they're going up to the northern edge of Greenland to molt, is because actually there's quite a lot of vegetation up there come the sort of late summertime. So those red areas, little valleys that are really quite vegetation rich, and they're safe there from predators pretty much, and they can molt out their flight feathers. So we didn't know they got that high up really, and that's been quite a find. Wait, this thing's gone nuts again. Of course, often the tags last on those 5, 6, 7 years, they can do. And the culmination of most of those stories is this sort of thing where they're just getting shot, which is, I mean, they're legal quarries. That's what's going to happen probably when you track something that long. But it does mean the whole kind of family structure that they have gets broken up. And of course, some of them you find it just sort of left on the Merster and they're just injured or whatever, but you know it from the tag. So it's a bit of a shame, but to be expected really. Because it would be nice, I think, to see kind of what these birds do in their normal family structures sometimes, what they would have been. This thing's just gone random now. So white fronts, yeah, probably well know that we've got 2 good local populations, Loch Hen and Stranraer, West Firth population. Come down a lot. They've really declined since the 1990s. I've spent 15 years trying to catch those and mark them up. I've done 50 catches now, and we've got 450 birds marked. So we're actually in a position now through 2 PhDs that we were working with. We're just starting to get papers out on what the effects have been on those marked birds and trying to work out why the population is declining. Really beautiful goose. Again, quite noble and sort of apprehensive and a bit offish, they just keep their distance from you. That's the sort of juvenile in the background there for the plumage types. Hasn't got the white fronds as clear. That's the population structure. So different flocks, basically up the west coast, but then this kind of one outlier in south east Ireland, which is Wexford, which is sort of reclaimed land where they've grown a lot of beet over the years, and beet is really heavily used by the geese there. It's quite a draw for them. So it's almost now the population split half in Wexford and kind of half in Scotland, pretty much, and mostly of that is in Islay. But yeah, each of those little populations is fairly, it's a kind of a site that's been in use since the 60s and well beyond that, probably. Stick in these tight family groups. They're long-lived kind of relationships within them. So young will hang around for up to sort of 8-9 years with the parents, probably learning over those years the different little sites that they used to feed on, because they used to be up in the hills on the mires. So you find little pools that have got cotton grass in them, and they're a good place to feed, so that structure works well for that. Because now they're on they've shifted more onto intensive pastures. You get this kind of agro build-up between the different sort of rugby teams of goose families that are not used to this close call situation. So yeah, this team of like 13 on the left or whatever beats up the team of 4 on the right. So the more you can keep your siblings with you, probably the better it is in terms of monopolizing these resources. But they don't really need to do that now. There's a lot of times they have aggro for no good reason, really. There's a lot of grass to go around. So yeah, cracking sort of black plumage belly bars it can be a male or a female. It doesn't really signify anything. It's asymmetric, and you can pose them for shots to get their abdominal profiles to look at how they're putting on fat and things. They take collars more because, collars for pink feet as well, and grey legs, because they're often in habitats like this where you can't really see a little leg ring. But there, as you'll have spotted on the right at the bottom, there's 2 orange collars for those 2. So that's like Islay looking across the Jura or somewhere. Their route is up to, this is probably going to go forward and just show the route up to Iceland and then to Greenland and the sort of habitats they're looking at. Again, massive decline in those. As I say, you wouldn't have predicted it probably in the 1990s. Everything was on the up. Everything was looking rosy. Green and white fronts were probably put in with everything thinking, geese, they're doing fine. But since then, that graph, basically the solid black line is Islay. That relates to the left-hand y-axis. That population's come crashing down on Islay from 14,000. We're now at 5,000 is the latest figure. Loch Ken, the dotted black line, right-hand axis come down from sort of 400. We're now down about 130. And Stranraer has come down from sort of 600, 700 down to about 170, I think was the count last winter. So massive decline. As I say, they don't need a lot. This is the little group plotted out, all the fixes one winter for basically the whole flock at Loch Ken, Threve area. You can see they've got the southern Threve fields, and then up towards Cogath, Finneness, Menzaduckery. Roosting on the lochs down there, little bays, and then Loch Winnie. That's it. It's about 20 fields. They're happy with that. That's all they do every day. We started some prototype collars on them, tags, and then, of course, we're looking at how the main thing there was we wanted to understand why they were having such poor breeding success. They got great survival once they're an adult, but they were bringing back fewer and fewer young each year. When it gets back to Iceland, it makes contact with the phone system again, because you lose contact with the bird in the sort of May to September. It gets back to Iceland, contacts the phone network and downloads all of its data. So here you see it bobbing around in Greenland by a loch, and then eventually, as you get towards the 12th of June, I think, you'll see it finally settle down. There it is on its little nest. So we get this remote view that you could never get for so many birds. These are all on females. So it's settled down. It's been going a day on that nest. Hasn't come off. And I think in another couple of days, you'll see it just drop off of there and then and it's away. There, like that. That's it. That's failure. That's nest failure. It failed after about 4 or 5 days. And with I think we've had about 100 of those birds tagged now. And the vast majority of them last about 3 or 4 days, 5 days on the nest in Greenland. It's like, what's gone wrong there? There's not a huge number of predators wandering about up there. And it's very rare for them actually to get the full 25 days that they need on the nest. If they do get that, then they tend to raise the brood And you see them like moving around the little marshes and gradually getting higher and higher altitudes because they're following the thaw to get the fresh grass growth and the good protein. But yeah, once you've got through the egg stage, you generally get your brood away, and that you'll see them when they come back here to confirm that. You'll see the brood with the adults. But yeah, huge sort of nest failure. And some of them even just sort of abstain. They don't bother for the year. They'll get all the way over there. You think, we've done all that. Why wouldn't you nest? But they don't settle down. And this year was one of those years. There was far more birds that didn't bother setting to nest. And it seemed to be because it was a very cold spring up there. And even the Canada geese that have now colonized that area didn't attempt to breed, so I'm told by people who are up there. So very poor year, albeit our bird that we call Galloway Glens bird that was tagged here, one of those birds out of the 3 brought back a little brood of 3 young, which is what we kind of predicted from that like duration on the nest, plus how many visits it made before. It looked like it laid 3 eggs, and it's back here with 3 young. So that's really nice. But yeah, it's only one of 2 birds that have brought back young out of the population of 120 here. So it gives you information on what the bird's doing as well, grazing, digging, wandering about, flying, because it's got a 3D accelerometer on the tag as well. That's just going to show you them migrating back to Iceland. And then in Iceland, unfortunately, even though they're fully protected, what often happens is we find them at places like this resort here in Iceland. They turn up, or the what's that one? The Nice Stay Iceland bed and breakfast. They turn up there as well sometimes. And that's, of course, because they've been shot again. And unfortunately, these 2 that got shot when they got back were the only 2 breeders in that year that we had tagged. So you lose the adult, but you probably lose the young as well, because they often kind of fly back round to see who's been shot. So it's unfortunately illegal. They'll say, probably quite rightly, they're in with grey legs or shooting grey legs, accidentally shot the white front. But it's difficult to know, because sometimes they use white fronts as decoys as well, and the call of them. But yeah, that's really sad when that happens, obviously, and you've followed them for all that time. And then you can obviously get an insight into it as well from X-raying them, which is what we used to do. So sort of 10-20% of the birds, you can find up to 5-6 lumps of lead shot in them on the bones. So some of the ones in Wexford had broken wing bones and things that have re-healed and that. So they're getting a fair bit of an attack on that front still, which doesn't help when you're declining as a population. You know, you need to try and raise your adult survival levels as much as possible, really. So yeah, there's some X-rays showing the sort of thing that you can get from that. That's if they don't ingest it as well. Other threats are increasing storminess across the North Atlantic, because birds are sometimes staying longer in Iceland now because they grow crops there. So there's more exposure to illegal hunting. There's more exposure to winter storms, because they finally do decide to come back when the snows come in. So they're on crops there, which didn't used to be there. So there you can see how a spring track and an autumn track of one bird got deflected away off to the east. All right, you don't see it for the southern one as much, but that year it came in over by Fife there instead of coming in on the west coast. And we had reports of birds on oil rigs and all sorts of things that year. It can happen in spring. We had one of our birds had to dip out to Denmark because it got such strong northerly winds, and as it approached the Faroes, and so then it had to navigate from Denmark straight up to Iceland from there, which it managed to do, which is amazing. And that's just from the latest report published by the Green and White Front Study Group, Goose, just this month, or last month, I should say, which shows that the population is now down by another 10% since last year. Tiger bean geese, yeah, sad about that. They don't really hang about here anymore. We've been studying them. Again, hugely successful survival rate, but very poor breeding success. And only 220 of them left in our country here. And then again, this is the sort of thing they can do during migration. Very adaptable. So they flew out. One flew out in the morning, made it all the way to Denmark. The other ones hit a massive storm mid-North Sea and got battered off to Orkney. One stayed there and navigated from Orkney to Denmark. The other ones nipped back over the Cairngorms back to Falkirk and navigated from there a week later. So they need a little bit of time to recover, but very apt at migrating to exact points, even when they start off hundreds of miles apart, which is amazing. That's what they can hit. Tiger bean geese, they're on the go. Maybe tomorrow night, they might be trying to head up to Denmark. They're nuts. They're just trying to get ahead of something, and they end up in that, which is not good for feeding. That's the sort of habitats they're going up to. Cracking habitats, sedge meadows. There's one with a tag collar on back then. That's what they breed in. So they'll get their nest just in up against the bottom of a tree, really well camouflaged. But again, very poor success. Could be like raccoon dogs that have been introduced there, things like that affecting them. But people send us these collar sightings from the stubbles in the autumn. Again, here we go, trail camera out on a roost site, someone putting out decoys. There's one beheaded. So someone shot one, shouldn't have shot one. 250 birds minus one, at least, and probably cut its head off because it had a collar on it and maybe a tag on it, unfortunately. And finally there, this is the Brent geese sort of saying that. So tiger bean geese dropping down, Brent geese kind of on the up in the region, slowly but surely, moving up from sort of 80s, 90s when they were pretty rare to now we're getting these sort of populations that flow down thing. Yeah. So, all right, basically Brent geese are on the up. There's a couple of 300 of them now in Loch Ryan area, Wigton area. So they're making use of these sort of eelgrass beds that are around, and maybe there are species that we might see more of that might progress east because there are more eelgrass beds there. So, and they're doing quite well breeding wise. They tend to turn up with a lot more young, albeit I could say a lot more on that, but I won't. Some of the marked birds we've had. Thanks. Thanks everyone. And I want to dedicate this to Arthur Thirlwell as well in memory of him, because he was a great help to me at Loch Ken over the years in watching out for the birds when we were trying to catch them, and a great goose observer. So yeah, sadly missed.
Thank you, Larry. As ever, that was brilliant. Now we've got a number of questions that have come in online. I've picked up some of these, and my boss McNabb is going to be slightly subservient to me for the first time in his life and be directed around this room with a microphone to take some questions to the audience. But the first question I have is from Divine Wellwater in Achill-Tabui. And she's querying with the avian flu stuff.
Yeah.
Wildfowling is still going on and went on through the whole of the last avian flu pandemic. We call it a pandemic. It's everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Is that wise when moving birds around? And where is the balance currently in terms of protecting our kind of important goose populations?
Well, I felt that considering the death rate was sort of unprecedented in our area, especially for the barnacle geese, and because they mix a lot with pink-footed geese at sites that are well shot on the salt marsh areas, the mudflats, but not only that, inland, where at the time I was seeing evidence of people still feeding, putting decoys out. So you're getting a mix of infected birds and uninfected birds at sites, and you're obviously getting birds disturbed, which is a stressor. Birds live in a landscape of fear, whatever the different gradients are, things that act on them. And shooting at that point, I felt was not something they needed because they were battling against a disease. And to me, you were trying to keep movements down to a minimum. You don't want a pinkfoot that's landed there being scared or critically shot, injured. So it's probably more susceptible to disease. You don't want that bird either dying there and catching the disease, or you don't want it heading off to fight. So
in human terms, the Olympics in Japan were cancelled for a year.
It felt like
chasing these things around even more might be probably counterproductive to trying to get the thing under control.
It felt like not the right thing to do when they were suffering from that, and it was discussed at the time. But and then of course I saw during the breeding season when it was affecting other NNRs and SPAs for breeding birds, the public was banned from visiting. So you weren't allowed to set for fear of moving the disease around. Now, of course, there's droppings all over the mercies and the fields where people are moving out shooting. So, to me, it felt like an unnecessary thing.
For once to move on, then, but the avian flu is still around this year, not as significant as last year. But if you're watching geese, stay well back.
If you can avoid disturbance of any birds like that, don't move them around.
Anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question, stick your hand up, and we've got another question here from Alison. She just commented that 70+ Brent geese currently at Wigton Bay on a motorhome overflow field.
Oh, nice.
It's just somewhere to go on holiday, isn't it?
That'd be a well-fertilised little pasture. So that's what they do at the Wig, I think, and Loch Ryan as well.
And there's a couple of queries here about the effect that you maybe have on the geese when you're carrying out your work.
Yep.
So Morag and Carol Ann have both asked similar questions. So Morag said, do the backpacks get affected if you can net the geese? So I suppose it's a risk you recapture birds and could injure them if they've got the thing. But and the other thing is, do you think the capture efforts and the tech actually affects the behaviour of the geese? Can you track, therefore, I suppose,
that's always the worry.
Tags on them, do they behave differently to animals without tags?
That's a fair comment and a fair worry. And of course, all I'd say is in response to that really is that there is absolutely no point in me doing it if I thought it did affect what the bird subsequently does, because it wouldn't be good science. It wouldn't give me a view onto them that I think is a real view. So there's no absolute way of testing that, but all you can do is look at proxies for it. So the tag birds, do they migrate at the same times? Do they feed in the same way? Do they join flocks in the same way? Do they feed in the same habitats? Do they breed in the same way? Which for things like collared white fronts, yes, the bird that came back this year is only 1 in 2 out of a flock of 130 that has a brood, that has a collar on it and a tag in it. So if that was affecting its behaviour and survival in any way, you'd think that wouldn't have been one of the breeders in this really tough year.
And I guess it's why it's all so heavily regulated, while you have a home.
Yeah, that's it. That's way of licensing. It's reviewed by a panel. You'd love not to do it, but you really won't get the answers to things unless you can study them.
Got one question coming from the audience.
Larry, you talked about nest failure, which sounds horrendous. Is that an increasing phenomenon?
Tricky to say for Greenland, because we've only had this insight over the last 3, 4, 5 years, really. So it seems like it's not a new thing, because white fronts have never been great at bringing back young, but the rate at which they do bring it back young has kind of gone down. So something extra has been acting, and some of that is probably increased spring snow cover. So they're getting heavier falls of snow more often in the spring, it's believed. Some of that is a natural kind of multi-decadal oscillation, they call it, in relation to Atlantic sea temperatures and how that affects the weather patterns. But some of that is overlaid now with probably climate change effects. So all we've really been able to do is look at body condition of birds and what they're using to get up there. And that all seems quite good, to be honest. That seems in their favour. They can get on Iceland now and they can build up body condition really early. They're not going over earlier. So you're getting this thing where they're out of sync. If birds do go early because they got to Iceland early from Ireland, because they left early because it was warmer, then they're actually going into a lot more trouble out there. So you might have to survive almost a month without feeding, almost some conditions. It can be -15 for weeks on end and snow cover. So that doesn't set you up well for laying eggs. So yeah, there's a whole sort of domino effect really in these sort of staging sites that's probably to play at it as well. Yeah. Okay, well, question from McNabb Laurie at the back.
I know more about hens than I know about geese, which we should do a talk about hens at some point. But interestingly, we talk about nest failures because a broody hen will sit on an egg for 4 or 5 days and then leave it if it's infertile or there's a problem with the egg itself. And I don't know, have you ever had anyone on site to test what the eggs are like when the birds are leaving?
0 instances of people on site to check them. Yeah.
I suppose the only place where people don't live generally.
It's really difficult terrain to get any kind of sample size or get that. We spent a month up there in Greenland and no one found a green and white front nest. There were no green and white fronts there, basically. We studied a lot of Canada geese, and all those Canada geese pretty much hatched off. So it didn't seem like a predation thing for them. They were nesting a bit later, and they were nesting closer to the lakes up there. But sorry,
fertility of the eggs could be something.
It could be, but it feels unlikely. It seems to be more that, when people did go up there and they did find nests in certain areas, they were often predated. So ravens and Arctic foxes, I think, was the main things. But they couldn't tell if that was to do with them visiting the nests as well. So at least with this, you haven't got people visiting the nest. It's remote technology. So it feels like it needs a balance again. Maybe it needs an expedition or some other way of telling what the actual agent was. If there was an agent or the bird, as you say, just abandoned it. But scoters I've seen where I can actually get at the nests, where I study scoters in Scotland. they are different to your hens in that they'll sit on a big old mound of mouldy eggs for sort of nearly 2 months. They don't give it up, and then eventually they have to give it up, but none of them hatch off. But other times they'll sort of half the clutches for, or half isn't. But I'm imagining for white fronts, there's no reason to really expect something on a scale of that to be infertile, I think.
Okay, I think we need to move forward now to the next part of this presentation,
right?
Which is the whole purpose of
the
original question. So
yeah, this one's much shorter.
It is much shorter, but just as interesting. So we have a number of projects in Galloway Glens. We have the Green the White Fronted Goose project, which is where I kind of re-met Larry from that project. We also have a project which we've done presentations on called the Threve Landscape Restoration Project. And at Threve, we're looking after all sorts of habitats and or not looking after them, you could say. We're actually allowing nature to look after them itself, because often nature kind of knows what it's trying to do. But one of the designations for this area was for geese. And there's these odd grey geese which were floating around, nesting in trees, doing things you didn't expect geese to do. And I said to Larry, what are these geese doing? He said, they're grey lags. And basically we came to the conclusion no one cared, which is wrong, because they're our only native breeding goose. So they're the less glamorous goose. So I turned McNabb upside down. We got a few bits of change out of him. And we got some tags put on some geese, and there's a tail. You're about to tell us of some less glamorous geese.
It's a tale of
you tell us a tale of the less glamorous geese, which I think are really quite interesting, and we'll take some more questions at the end.
I think this is the wandering goose of your title, isn't it?
It is the wandering goose.
By the way, that's the little tags. If anyone's interested in handling them, just to have a look at them. They're the ones we put on. Grey legs and pink feet and white fronts, just for the feel of the weight of them. That one there, you can see where it was shot. So it broke the collar in half. It actually saved the goose, probably, because it's still alive. So although it got shot, it's kind of body armor as well. So we probably need to get them made out of carbon fiber or something. Yeah. I want to be more upbeat with this one, I guess, as well, and not dwell on the macabre shootings of tag geese. So it's a brand new project with National Trust Scotland, Threve there, and we want to better understand the local grey lags and how they were maybe going to use the new habitats that were getting restored there, the new wetland areas. And I thought I'd represent that by a wee gosling. It's just hatched out and it was one on Isla that my mate picked up. He's on a farm there and it was just on its own wandering about on a road. So he was raising that. That's Maverick, he called it, which is quite a nice little thing. Usually that was the plan initially. I was going to try and catch females on the nests on islands at Threve. So I get the ones that are really local to the site, hefted to that area, and I'll be able to see what they did on the fields there. But that plan soon got blown out the water by AI after I sort of set out this idea. And when I was going around there in the spring trying to find the nests in 2022, it was obvious there were quite a few dead birds, so dead grey legs, dead pink feet around there, which were probably AI, I guess. And the chap who'd seemed very keen on us catching on his island as well on the D suddenly said, don't catch on my island. So that was a problem. And the only active nest I found at Threve on the island there was flooded out about a few days after I found it because of the Glenlocker Dam. You might know the dam there on the D that changes the water levels. I didn't realise it had such a massive impact, but I think it was about a metre or two it changed in a few hours, basically. So that was that. So I then understood why the grey legs weren't doing so well there and breeding very well, and why there was precious little breeding wildfowl in that area, it looked like. And maybe why they're trying to nest in osprey platforms up in pine trees, which I hadn't seen before. Then fell back to the sort of idea. The next idea was to try and catch males or females, of course, then at molt sites. So when they're lost the ability to fly and they've molted their primary, secondary feathers, hoping that there'd be some sort of molt flocks along Loch End. I didn't know if there were particularly, but that was the next plan. And then if that failed, I thought, well, next up is you try and cannon net a flock somewhere nearby and hope that the provenance of those birds is fairly local as well, although they could be pretty much from anywhere, really. They could be from Ireland or I mean, even Icelandic birds used to winter at Loch End, but that's all changed due to climate change. They're all up in Orkney now, pretty much. That's the last 30 years we've lost all the Icelandic greylegs from around here. So that's another big change that's happened with geese. Now these are our local or resident UK breeders, really. So yeah, option 2 is what went for. Try and catch them on the molt site, and we managed to nab 2 birds out of 4 in mid-July there, just along the side of Loch End at Coguth, just by Crossmichael there. There's been a group of about 50 or so that looked like they were molting, so just running about in the field with greylegs. So we just took the opportunity to grab some, basically coming on the loch side in a little inflatable boat, and a couple of other people running into the field with a load of cows, and we managed to herd them into the fence. Got 4 birds. One was a young one, young female, 2 males, I think it was, but one of those had lost half its wing, was hanging off because it had been shot. So we didn't use that one because that would never fly. So we just did the 2 that were, healthy birds. 1 male, 1 female, and then what this will rapidly present, hopefully, over a few slides, will be the animations of those data that those birds gave us and where they went and their fates. And the frame rates, I'm trying to say there is about 1 day per second, unless I say otherwise, unless I remember to say otherwise. So this is down the bottom corner, you get this little tick-tock of the date. So it was mid-July where we caught them. It'll loop. So it will just kind of get to about 30th or 31st of July, I think. But yeah, that's where we caught them. I can't see them. That's where we caught them on Coguth on the mound. And all I wanted to say in relation to that was both birds that were tagged actually there. There's the dot of the catch. Both birds back there just 2 days later. So, grabbed hold of them, messed about with them a bit, put a collar on them, but they're back there. So not a huge event to them, I'd say. We've had that with most other species. Bean geese caught at night on the roost, back there the next night. So quite bomb-proof, a lot of them. The other thing to see with that is how they're on the water a lot more and on the shorelines in the first few days after catching, because they're still molting, so they're still vulnerable. But then gradually you'll see they start to, as they grow their feathers back, they begin to move up on the fields there, Finnenests, MODs, and then you'll see them start to fly up onto land. And it looked like as soon as they started to fly up there in the north bit, that was it. They were away after that. They were away down to, luckily, they went down to Thrieve, to the new wetlands. Yippee, because that was like the whole point of it, was to see how they use that area. Okay, they only stayed there 5 days, this one. I should say, this is the female. It's the female one. So it stayed there 5 days, and what you'll see from that is it basically uses the nicely dug out and sort of restored Thrieve wetland area there with the D. It's a great roost site for these birds. It was with a flock of, 500 geese. And each day it would fly out from there and use these stubbles. So in different parts of these stubbles, you see it kind of hoovering up spilt grain from these different areas quite close to the farm as you go towards Castle Douglas there. So that was quite neat. And then spent 5 days doing that. And then the 4th of August down here, you'll see a flight fixed there. That was it leaving before it loops again. So it's leaving then and it's going to the Nith. So it came in there, across the hills, past Priffle, and ended up down at Casthorne on the estuary. People can't see that. People can't see that. Down there in the Nith estuary, and then, of course, moved up into the Nith. And then it spent a lot of time mooching about near Ruthwell, Longbridge-Muir, roosting on the river, roosting on the estuary, flying in each day, using stubbles. You can see those little light areas on that map. Google map is basically stubbles that have been cut. Sometimes it'd be a silage field that has been cut and it's a bit of fresh growth, but mostly stubbles. So no great loss there. They did that for about the whole of late August through until, as you see later, down to about mid-October time. So, you see those flock by Loch End, think they're eating grass all the time. Well, they're not. They're moving about and they're moving across at a landscape scale using stubbles. So that was them getting up to Loch Rutland Loch and Milton Loch and Loch Arbor Loch up there. Again, just using stubbles in that area. And then coming to September time, they eventually this female makes a decision, having been at the end of the East Park Reserve and the Locher Water. You'll see it head off on the 18th of September. It suddenly just decides to go. across Cumbria and away. And there it is coming up now. There it goes. There it goes. But that's what it was before. That was a nice sunny day when you remember when it was nice and warm back in August, 6th of August, lovely day outside the NIF, having a pint on the table there. And it was an amazing scene. It was a good sort of spectacle of thousands of geese, Canada geese, some of them, but grey legs, all preening away, all very happy, mallards, egrets, red shank, everything, you name it, it was there. Absolute joy. Nice little cattle graze pasture in the background is the Merse. Everything hunky-dory, but yeah, decided to leave there. And then this is an hourly migratory track down through basically the M74 corridor past the higher land of Cumbria. I mean, it got up to 750 meters. It's pretty high. And 110 kilometers an hour. Did the route that it took me and my son to do the other day. It did it quicker. It did it in just over 2 hours, basically, which is 100 miles, 2 hours. So I've had a little bit of a following wind. But yeah, these birds that can get down from Iceland, so barnacle can get down from Iceland to Islay in about 8 hours sometimes with a following wind. So they're cracking on at like 130k, things like that. Amazing, really. And then, of course, when it got there, did the same sort of stuff again. It just finds little quarries, flooded quarries, gravel pits, rivers, flight ponds, things like that, and dots about finding these little stubbles again in the landscape, hoovering up the grain. I mean, some of them might have been crops, but for the time of year, I think it was getting quite late for that. We're into October now. And then eventually it seemed to settle on this valley, and I was getting excited then. This is from 18th September up to the 30th of December. It went down to Ripon to start with, the Ripon racecourse. I think, did you get a message from someone who had a flock on the racecourse?
Yeah, this is 3 racecourses.
All right.
Ripon, Patrick in first races, and someone sent a photograph of it from Ripon races.
Ripon races,
yeah.
A little hat on.
Yeah,
it's just
it won the tote.
Did it?
Yeah,
bless it. No, I mean I've highlighted subtly, or not so subtly, but yeah, I've highlighted the RIP of Ripon because it got to the 30th of December, and unfortunately the tag stopped moving at that point. And as always happens with tags, I get itchy feet after a couple of nights of thinking about it. And so I jumped in the car and went down to see what happened to it. And this is its last 5 days, just at Christmas Day there, Boxing Day, and then heading through to the new year. It doesn't make it to New Year. It just gets to the 30th of September. Unfortunately, it visits this flight pond in the south here. There, the flight pond. And then from the flight pond, it visits the big manor house just north of there. That kind of visit. He went to visit the Lord, and then ended up in a little farm shed, it looked like, over on the left. So I thought, oh, this doesn't look good. And of course, what you get with these tags as well, these amazing readouts. And yeah, the 3D accelerometry, XYZ, it flatlines at 12 o'clock on the 30th of December. So I thought it's either the bird is dead or the tag's dropped off. Tags sometimes drop off, amazingly, but yeah, they're quite well constructed and they do fall off. Battery charge tumbles after the 30th. No solar charging, but bizarrely, I suddenly twigged that it's a steady 2 to 4 degrees from that time as well, which I thought, well, it's warmer than that at the moment. And it's certainly more variable than that. So I thought it's probably in a bloody freezer. So yeah, that was me. All right, we're getting in the car, we're going. So I went down, my boy, and it was interesting to see the landscape because it sort of throws back to what they're getting at Loch Ken maybe. Because what I really wanted to see was what that bird did, is if it came back to Loch Ken to breed or to molt, or what it was going to do, and where was it going to breed down there? And I was just interested. It's the first female that I've tagged, and I just wondered what it got up to. But we only got 6 months out of it, which is a shame. So yeah, Yorkshire Dales, your national park, lots of sheep, lots of pheasants, lots of wolves, noticeable amount of wolves. But that little view on the left, I thought, when I saw that, I looked out the car, I thought, Christ, that just looks like Loch Ken when you're going past Cross Michael there. So I don't know if they key in on certain landscapes that just feel familiar to them or what, but the main thing was there compared to where we caught it on the molt site is a load of wolves. So if you're molting and you can't run away from anyone or any animal to the loch and escape, you're in trouble a bit. So I think maybe this is quite an attractive roost site because we haven't really got any fences along the loch edge, loch end. There's both sides, you can just walk out straight onto the field, you know, so that's quite a nice little escape route for them, a nice place to gather. And then, of course, as we went further into the dark dale, we saw more signs of kind of death. So, yeah, the grey leg there laying dead in the field. Oh, Christ. And then, of course, there was another grey leg running around in circles that looked like it had been shot. And then I found this nice little farm, and we drove down to it, and the lady opened the door. I said, do you mind me asking, is there a grey leg goose around here you've seen with a collar on, quite a big sort of collar, grey collar? And she said, I don't know about that. And I said, well, I said, does anyone shoot around here? And she said, everybody shoots around here. I was like, oh, right, okay. I mean, she said it in a Yorkshire accent, but I said, is there anything up there in that barn, like a cool store or something like that? And then the farmer bloke came out and he said, oh, yeah. He said, I'll take you up there. He said, it's the gamekeeper's lockup. He said, oh, he won't mind. He won't. He's the Lord's gamekeeper. He said, he does all the shooting around here. He said, I used to shoot pheasants, but I fell out with so-and-so and I'm not doing it. So anyway, he took us up there, opened up the store, and there, behold, was this sort of little, what reminded me of a cloakroom, actually, kind of morbid cloakroom from school, where there's just all these, the geese are just hanging up. So I had a quick count, you know, it's quite a sort of slightly awkward situation. And I said, oh, do you mind to take a picture? And he said, oh, don't, take a picture of me in it. And he said, we haven't done anything illegal, have we? And I said, well, no, not really. I said, they're kind of quarry species. So you can shoot them for, personal eating and whatnot. But I think there was about 30 odd in there, plus a load of mallards and everything else. But I mean, afterwards, I was thinking, as we were walking back down it, and then he started telling me this story of what's his name? Marco Pierre White. His brother comes down every now and then, picks them up, and does a bit of ferreting there. And he allegedly, I want to say the word allegedly, he takes them back up and they take them to the restaurant in Edinburgh. And it makes a nice addition to the burgers up there, which that's not so good. That's not so good. So yeah, if it's you can shoot the geese for personal use or to give to friends and things, but the scale of that was slightly worrying. And I got the tag back, of course, because that's worth a fair bit of money, and left the goose there. But yeah, you just when you sort of come across it again, you just knew what had gone into that little goose, what had gone on in its head in getting to that point. But it was kind of just totally inert at that point. He just took the tag off it. But yeah, it was an interesting thing, because that's only 2 geese that we'd put tags on, and one of them had gone to that. And I sort of thought, well, I've only found out about that because of that bird with that tag on. What if I'd have done 10 tags? What would you find out was going on with grey legs? That's 50% death rate within 6 months. That's high. I presume it's not that, because there seems to be quite a few grey leg about, and probably populations are increasing. But yeah, it's near Bolton Castle. If you ever go to your national park in the Dales, there's not a huge amount of life there. Bolton Castle, I was reminded of the Game of Thrones, the Boltons, wasn't it? And that family, it's Lord Bolton's ground. And then weirdly, he's got this little pen of wild boar up the back. And yeah, that was somewhat sort of poignant, seeing the wild boar and here and reading the notice about how there used to be plenty of them in the woods and they were hunted out to extinction in the 1600s. I thought, yeah, Christ, it'd be nice to see that sort of thing. It's amazing what you can kind of wipe out with a bit of effort like that. So yeah, sad end for that goose. Been looking forward to seeing what that did. But yeah, this is a slightly happier tale. Is old male Bluey, number 8, who was caught with that female. Wasn't paired with it. That's been bobbing around 3 for a lot more. And then this is, say, running through the whole sequence, probably all the way to December. You can see how it often goes on different trajectories, but they often move at the same time in the land. So that one went right the way across the Gretna and hung out there, eating on stubbles for a long while, and then eventually kind of moves back and ends up today again on the 3 wetlands there. So I've got a good hope for that being a breeding bird here. And hopefully it'd be nice to track down where it's kind of nesting, because they will visit the nest site with the female quite a bit, probably in early April time. It might get down to it, but they're like the two birds are back together again. Male goes off, leaves the female behind. So there's this constant flux of birds from different areas. So although you see, 500 birds in a field maybe every day at Loch Ken, some of those birds there might be from Ripon, some of them might be from Ireland, I don't know. And they're sort of changing every sort of night, there you go. That's male 8. It's got an unringed mate. So that was just at Parton House down the road there. Sort of knee deep in grass on that field feeding away. That was a flock of 18. So a few different pairs and one pair with a brood of 4. I think it was quite old ones. So that's doing well for itself. Again, no sign of it freaking out about the collar. And you can watch these birds live if you want on that website there, which Nick set up, and I set up with Nick's help as part of this project. And that there was, of course, the female when it was on the nest. So giving us a whole load of information that I didn't know about greylegs. I mean, to be fair, I wasn't that into greylegs before this, because having lived my life in London and my dad taking me up St James's Park, they were the big dopey kind of goose that you fed a bit of white bread to along with the mallards. So it's difficult to get rid of that conditioning that this is a real wild animal. It's doing some good stuff. So I'm learning with this project, to be honest. Respect. So thank you for listening again. And I want to thank, of course, Davy Thompson's team at Thrive for being so supportive. And of course, Nick McNabb for promoting the events and putting on these talks. I think they've done a great job with that over these months. And thanking my family there as well, Anna and Jack, for putting up my daft plans and helped me catch geese on a hot day with a substandard boat that had a puncture in it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Larry. And yes, slightly sad that all the effort that we had to shake that money out of McNabb and 50% of it down the Swanee, but we've got the tag back so we can use it again. And I do think it's quite, we pick and choose somehow as humans what wildlife is important. And I think that's quite arrogant, actually. And we thought that the greylag was less important, less glamorous, because it is our farmyard goose. I can remember people telling me, oh, they're just old feral geese that reverted back to their true colours of grey. Because that's not true. They're just wild animals like other wild animals. So finding information and stories out about them would help us understand the populations a bit more. We've got a few questions. And again, if we could have some from the audience, that would be great. I've got the first question is right early on in your talk. Gwynilla Forbes, I wonder if that's with Gwynilla Forbes is married to Commander Forbes. He was the head of the Danish resistance during the war. I doubt it. He's very, very old. Very, very old. Anyway, up north, red-throated divers, black-throated divers, etc., on hydroelectric rivers.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very poor breeding success because they'd lay their eggs on the side of the loch, and then the water would disappear or the water would suddenly come up, and they'd never really evolved to live in rivers that just went up and down like yo-yos without any warning. What they did up there was they created some floating islands in certain places. You think this is something that could be considered as something that's worth looking at? It's something we considered with Davy in terms of putting fish boxes with straw up in trees at Thrive. To keep the water away from the geese. Just to put them up out of the way of it, Because I mean, rafts work well on lakes for divers, yes, or can do. Although again, if you keep, if a diver kept using that little raft there, then things like ravens and corvids are quite clever, and it becomes a sort of obvious point to go and visit and maybe predate. So you need variety of sites a lot of the time, or else they become a bit of a bird table. But yeah, certainly on that river, it'd be difficult to establish a raft, I think, because the flow rate's so high. But yeah, the similar concept is get a platform up in the tree, basically. It's a raft in a tree. It's a raft in a tree. Another question relating to something which relates to the talk that you've, with the first presentation and this presentation. I can't actually see from the handwriting. It looks like Lord Aldgirth, but I don't know if there is a Lord Aldgirth, but we'll call them Lord Aldgirth. They've been promoted, whoever they are. So thank you, Mr. Lord. Could lead in the bodies of geese be causing infertility? And I suppose if you look in your earlier presentation, and we know the amount of shooting historically with lead that went on. Obviously, people that are shooting now over wetlands shouldn't be using lead. But does that lead excess in their bodies cause potential infertility?
All I'm saying is it doesn't for pink-feet and greylag. They're of excellent production. They're more heavily shot and will be more heavily pricked with lead shot.
Right.
So
it aids in fertility.
It doesn't affect fertility. I think it probably kills a goose quicker than it makes it infertile.
Right. Okay.
I'd have said. Yeah.
And before we take some questions from the audience, Anne doesn't say where she's from, but where she's been. We found a single sick greylag on Thurso Beach last week. Sadly died unusual on its own. Now, maybe you could pick up on this one, but I got in touch with Larry at some point in November, I think it was, where I found a sick barnacle, I think it was, on the beach near Sutton-Ness. And I went through the reporting process, but it's critical, isn't it, that people report these things?
They should report them. The only problem is I think there's like thresholds before which DEFRA will act. So you need to find out, I can't remember what it was now, 4 or 5 of something like a goose dead in a sort of small area before they'll come and collect those carcasses and check them. I mean, you can look online for the details, but basically, if you've got one, it's kind of, you need to report, it's best to report it to someone like Nature Scots, probably the local office, because they'll be plugged in with an app they've got now for reporting dead birds or birds behaving oddly. So yes, we're still seeing, like the other day I went for a walk, Boxing Day, I think it was, at Mersehead, and there was a juvenile barnacle goose just spinning around in a field, which is classic AI symptoms from last year. So yeah, there's the odd ones dotted about still. I don't know what the risks are of it mutating and becoming a new variant that then can go through the population again. I don't know the ins and outs of that. It's like COVID or something, isn't it?
Yeah,
a new variant comes along. But
the key is to report it, because people who are interested, so people like me, Larry, and other people who are already interested in this sort of thing, they will report them, but we're kind of a tiny fraction of the population.
Yeah.
And the more people can get to report that, the greater the chance it has a trigger that someone in government level might give a damn. Because there's a real risk if there's no reports coming in, the absence of data defines an absence of problem. And that isn't the case often. So it's very important that people report these things. It's far better to over-report and create an interest than to think you walk past something and not report it. I remember reporting a dead cetacean many years ago, and I phoned up a guy in SNH. There's a dead dolphin on the beach near, I think I was near Southern-Ness as well, maybe where I go and find corpses. And I phoned that into SNH at the time. I guess lots of people have, a guy called Jonathan, just record this. I bet lots of people have phoned it in. It looks like it's been here for a while. It's probably been there for 5 or 6 days. No one had phoned it in. One of the busiest tourist beaches in the region. People walking past it, you can smell it from quite a distance away, but no one would report it. We have a question at the back there. McNabb's going to bring the microphone on to you.
It's not a question really. It's just more of maybe it's an education thing, because you sort of preaching to the converted here about reporting things, but there are an awful lot of people out there who just walk dogs or just go for a walk and would see a dead bird and just think, oh, avian flu, and not know that it would help anybody to report it. Is there any funding to increase awareness anywhere? I don't know how you do it. It's just a thought.
I'm not aware of any funding. I don't know if it's featured on the news quite a lot, so I'm guessing people have become more aware of it through that. But actual direct efforts, I think there's some signage now in some places and things like that. But yeah, it's getting the message through. I don't know how else you go about it other than when it does appear. Like I try to do articles on it on the web, and in the local papers there are articles on it. To me, ever seeing I think probably in my period on the Solway, the amount of dead geese I ever saw would be counted on one hand in a winter. Winter time's not hard for a goose. These things are insulated in the best down going wintertime on green fields everywhere. It used to be a time of hardship, I think, more when winters were hard, but not now. It was the most likely place you'd see them would be on the sort of spring staging area in Rockcliffe Marsh. If you walked around that, you might find the odd corpse, but all the other areas, I never saw dead geese. And now I'm seeing them quite a lot, when I go for a walk, as you say, anywhere on the coast, you can see a dead goose, really.
Okay, I've got a question here online to take first. We'll take another question. Now, I like this question because the questionnaire, Carol Ann Weston, has said that you will know this because Carol, I don't know this report or this person, so I'm hoping Larry will tell me more. You will know about Conrad Lorenz's study.
Oh yeah. Solomon's Ring. No, anyway.
No, different ring, maybe. A study of grey lags and the similarity to behaviour in humans in terms of familial ties have long-term effects of grief and distress. Have you observed this in any of the local grey lag populations? And could I say that other populations of geese?
No, because I haven't seen live death happen. So I'm always there sort of after the event. So there's a corpse there.
Yeah.
I haven't really been in a position to see in a controlled, there's that bird I know, there's that bird I know. What was that bird done when that one dies?
I'd say, Carol, send us a link to that report. You'll get an email from me tomorrow. Send us a link to the Conrad Lorenz's study. I will forward it to Larry, and we might even share it on the Galloway Glens Facebook page. We have a question here coming from the front as well. Just wait for the microphone.
I've seen it in tinfoil bulbs.
Under optimum conditions, including staying lucky, how long would you expect that tag on male 8 to last?
On the male greylag to last? Well, we're regularly getting 5 years, 6 years now out of these tags. So I've had this was inspired, you see, by my lovely artwork. A chap took it on and produced it for 66 North. So it's a little bit of artistic license, and there it goes from their London shop to the Iceland one now. But that was based on Hooper swans migrations and Buick swans as well. We did some stuff on them. But the Hoopers, we had tags going for 6 years. There was a swan happened to call Hope, but that was still going, I think, 9 years later, the tag. So very well built for a bit of dumb plastic, but resistant to, minus 50 degrees over the green and ice cap. Put them in a freezer, still going, still transmitting. It's better than my phone, to be honest. My phone won't.
Okay, there are a number of questions coming in, but one I'm going to pick up here. This is more for you, Larry. The Margaret Netley, she's phoning in from Montana.
Montana?
Yeah. And she used to live in Gatehouse of Fleet, which is potentially it's Gatehouse of Fleet, not you, that's created the link to this event. But
I used to live in Montana.
Did you used to live in Montana? Excellent. I thought it was Peckham.
That's why I'm so good on it.
However, she's saying they're using tags very much like yours now on wind farms, and they want to get some more contact with you about how they can use tags in Montana around wind farms, which I thought was very interesting. So I'll forward that on.
Feel free.
Any more questions from the audience within here? We're rolling towards the end of the night. But what I'll do, we'll close it down. I've really enjoyed tonight. Thank you very much. First of all, we have a number of other events going on though in Galloway Glens. So in a couple of weeks' time, I think we have an event on mammals. Now, this is a bit scarce. So anyone who's coming along to that event, it's going to be a live one in here, plus the online one. But those coming along, can you keep your trousers tucked into your socks? We will have small furry livestock. And I don't know if it's dangerous or not, but it's definitely coming here. Our cameraman guy is trying to work out how to film this. It's going to be like it's a bit bigger than a flea circus, but smaller than a lion tamer's cage. So but it'll be good fun. And we can talk about mammals at home. That will be. So take a booking now. It should be a sellout. It should be great fun. And once again, in the normal way, I'd like to thank Larry for what has been a brilliant night, and close this down again, and see you all soon for mammals at home.
Thanks, Neil.